Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the Illinois Innovation Network. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melissa Haas and I'm part of the Federal Relations team for the University of Illinois system. Some of you may have been able to listen in on our last Altogether Extraordinary webinar, which focused on the Discovery Partners Institute, one of the hubs within the Illinois Innovation Network. Today, we're looking forward to telling you all about IIN, a statewide network of 15 hubs that includes all of the state's public universities. The IIN seeks to improve the state's economy through an equity-based and inclusive approach to innovation, research, and education. Just as a preview of what's to come, we have 4 speakers with us today. After their joint presentation, we'll move into a question and answer session. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to share any questions or comments that you have into the Q&A box, which we'll be monitoring. All right, now for intros. First, we will hear from Jay Walsh. Dr. Walsh serves as the Interim Vice President for Economic Development and Innovation for the U of I system. His office leads initiatives in support of the system's economic development mission to ensure that innovations grow beyond the university and into the private sector through a pipeline of idea acceleration units and connected partnerships. Next, we have Kyle Harfst, who is an Associate Vice President within our U of I system Office of Economic Development and Innovation. As such, he serves as Chief of Staff for the office and works closely with our Offices of Technology Management and Illinois Ventures. Kyle also serves as the Executive Director of IIN and is responsible for managing and growing the IIN, including development and management of working groups and program development. Following Kyle, we will hear from Jeanette Tamayo. Jeanette is a visiting senior policy advisor supporting the U of I system's Office of Economic Development and Innovation on several initiatives related to economic development and workforce development across the state. She's a former legal aid attorney with extensive policy and program experience in state, federal, and local organizations working in under-resourced communities on socioeconomic equity issues. And finally, we will hear from Dr. Jerry Blasey. Dr. Blasey is the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Northern Illinois University. In this role, he oversees NIU's research endeavors, supporting individual researchers and building teams and collaborations across units and with other institutions. He is also chair of the IIN Council, which is IIN's governing body and consists of a representative from each hub. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Jay to get us started with the presentation. Jay, the microphone is yours.
Melissa, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction to all of us. And I would say a quick thing, this is a presentation about the Illinois Innovation Network. There's 3 of us from the University of Illinois system. But very importantly, there's also a 4th person here who's Jerry Blasey, who's the chair of the IIN Council at Northern Illinois University. This is a network across the entire state, certainly beyond the 3 universities that are the system of the University of Illinois. This is a very important partnership, certainly from the point of view of the University of Illinois system. It's a very important partnership with the other public universities and the hubs across the entire network. We've been blessed to have such great leadership from Jerry and from others across the entire Illinois Innovation Network, and you'll hear about that as we go along today. Next slide, please. And next slide. So if you look at a mission statement of a university, in the University of Illinois system is one example, you're going to see several components of the mission statement. And most universities state this in slightly different ways, but they all have the components of we're here to educate our students, we're here as a university to create new knowledge, and we're here to put that new knowledge to work at scale and with excellence. So certainly for the University of Illinois system, this is exactly what our mission is. And the Illinois Innovation Network is one manifestation of the way in which we educate students, in which we create new knowledge and we put that new knowledge to work. So how does innovation advance? The foundation of all innovation is basic principles that are observed. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see the technology readiness levels, which start with basic principles observed, and then technology concepts, formulated experiments that prove the proof of concept, and then upward through development and deployment of new technologies. There are numerous, hundreds, thousands of examples of technology that has started within universities and has moved out into practical use. I list two of them here. One is one that we probably all use every day, and that is Google. I sort of remind you here that Google started as an NSF-funded project at Stanford, and it was funded as a digital library program to look at ways in which one can catalog information, which certainly Google has done very well. It catalogs information from across the network. More recent example is mRNA vaccines. Most of us view mRNA vaccines as new, and certainly for humans they are new, but they have been at least 30 years, actually well more than 30 years, but I draw the line here at 30 years ago at UC San Diego, Salk, and Baikal. This was mRNA vaccines were demonstrated in cells, and at one of our Big Ten colleague universities, University of Wisconsin, just over 30 years ago, mRNA vaccines were demonstrated in mice. It has taken the intervening 30 years to move up the TRL levels so that it is now a system that is proven in an operational environment, people across the world. But that's the process that is necessary for moving an idea from basic principles all the way up to deployment. Sometimes it's quick, and sometimes, in the case of mRNA vaccines, it takes a while. That as we're watching this pandemic evolve, it has significant impact over a long period of time. Next. So what did the universities do, and how do they advance innovations? So they create new knowledge. We do this through a process we call research. We create talent, educate folks, undergrads, grad students, postdocs, residents, and fellows in medical systems. That new knowledge then transfers out to companies. That talent also eventually graduates and moves out to companies to produce new products and new services. And through that process, you get economic development. Universities also develop innovation hubs, and they have extension offices. And those units take that new knowledge and work with either existing companies or new companies to produce new products and services, and again, have economic impact well beyond the university. Next slide, please. The Autumn, which is the group that, academic technology group that monitors the movement of new ideas out from universities to societal use, has put together a brief slide, which I present here, that shows that basic research on the bottom right, is done to learn and understand concepts, and applied research is to solve specific problems. That's part of the pathway from new knowledge goes from basic to applied and then into deployed areas. So this drives the innovation economy, this research. And as you can see, over approximately a 2-decade period, about $1.7 trillion worth of economic activity came out of universities. And you can see from the rest of this slide that there was significant impact of the new knowledge that was created within universities and brought out from those universities in a rather deliberate way to drive an innovation economy. And the next slide goes into that a little better. You can see there's an R&D up sort of at 11 o'clock on this cycle on the left-hand side. So with about $72 billion worth of R&D in any particular year, the year that's listed here is 2018. What universities produced was on the order of 26,000 disclosures, which resulted in about 17,000 patent applications and 7,600 new US patents. There are also patents beyond the US and the rest of the world. And you ended up licensing those, about 9,000 of those. You had 800 and something new products, and you end up with public use out of that. So the research that we as taxpayers fund results in significant public use and economic growth through this technology transfer life cycle. So what we're doing when we're talking about IIN is we're looking at the mission of the universities and the linkage between those universities and hubs. And this is all across the state of Illinois. We're leveraging the resources that are being put into these institutions and these hubs by the public with the goal of driving economic impact. And now we're going to go to the next slide, and I'll turn the microphone over to Dr. Harps.
Thanks, Jay. Well, the Illinois Innovation Network has been in existence for almost 2 years. The idea has actually been around more than 4 years. University of Illinois President Tim Killeen and former Vice President Ed Seidel were the chief architects of this tool, initially as an economic development strategy for the state. Utilizing the backbone of higher education, the Illinois Innovation Network was created. IIN, for short, is a set of interconnected hubs throughout the state, representing those universities who have a public presence and reach. There are 15 hubs throughout the state, including all 12 publics, in addition to the Discovery Partners Institute, Distillery Labs in Peoria, and the UIC Health Sciences campus in Rockford. I'd like to mention that stewardship is a large part of a public university's mission. As such, the connection and impact that public universities have on local communities in the state is emphasized in this network. While each hub is unique, there are many similarities. Focus areas typically are included with the following themes: computing and data, food and agriculture, entrepreneurship, environment and water, and health and wellness. There are brief summaries in each of the 15 hubs in the appendix of the slide deck that will be made available. I would encourage you to review the slides as the demographic and geographic reach of the hubs are identified. Next slide, please. There are 4 basic principles within the IIN. Those principles include driving inclusive innovation, equitable workforce development, and sustainable economic growth. Assessing and meeting the needs of each region through a combination of inclusive collaborative research, public-private partnerships, and entrepreneurship and training programs. Collaborating with hubs and sharing best practices. And finally, advocating for higher education at both the state and national levels. To accomplish these principles, there have been 5 standing working committees established in addition to our work addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. Those committees include education and workforce development, entrepreneurship, corporate engagement, public policy, and research and collaboration. Next slide, please. So through the support and investment from the state of Illinois and other partners, hubs are receiving capital support to stand up their operations. As part of this support, a collaborative environment termed Engage will take place. Engage will be the technological backbone of the IIN. This will include deeply linked classrooms, labs, and conference space. This capability will enable a host of opportunities, including new ways of utilizing data to solve problems. This past year, we've seen the importance of these type of backbones due to the pandemic via those Zoom or team meetings, which we've all enjoyed. Next slide, please. As we have been establishing work plans for the IIN, we've been utilizing the state's economic development plan as a guide. The key industries lined up nicely with the IIN hubs. And I'd like to mention that we'll discuss 3 initiatives in which the IIN has devoted energy. Those initiatives include sustaining Illinois seed grants, equity in the workforce, in collaboration with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunities Broadband Planning through what's called the Readiness initiative. All 3 initiatives, including broadband, have important implications with respect to equity. Next slide, please. So the IIN is charged with helping to solve grand challenges in the state. When forming committees and establishing a governance structure, it was evident that sustainability as a theme is extremely important to us all. When we talk about sustainability, there are a number of elements included. Sustainability may be related to education and workforce development, economic development, health and wellness, water, food and agriculture, computing and data, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a result of this discussion of sustainability and the desire to solve grand challenges, proof of concept funding, known as Sustaining Illinois Seed grants, emerged. Some of the parameters included requiring participation of at least 2 hubs with each proposal, and the encouragement of follow-on funding through state and federal agencies and through foundations. To date, 12 proposals have been funded, with a 3rd round being announced in June, and I've provided a few examples of those funded proposals. They include standing up a mobile-based child vaccination program for underserved communities in Illinois, using novel digital analysis and artificial intelligence tools, creating a sustainable urban regional modeling network, squashing hunger in Eastern Illinois through partners in produce, improving food access and decreasing food insecurity among low-income residents, and finally, establishing robotic technology tailored to support Illinois specialty crops. Next, I'd like to introduce Jen Tamayo to discuss equity in the workforce.
Good morning. Next slide. When we think about equity, we recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion are absolutely critical, that we have to review our policies, practices, and programs to ensure that every student receives what he or she needs to be successful. We need to ensure that when we're looking at it from a group focus, we're allowing for all dimensions of diversity, for everyone to be able to participate fully in economic and civic life, to be able to reach their full potential. Yet as a university, while we have the personal focus and the group focus, we also have this community focus, where we have to actively plan with affected residents and communities to ensure that our place within a community helps create equity. Oftentimes, when we talk about diversity, we're thinking about numbers and groups. When we think about participation and inclusivity, we're again thinking about groups. But when we have a community focus and an equity focus, we're thinking about outcomes. How do we move the needle? How do we ensure that every individual, regardless of his or her lived experience, has an opportunity within the context of community to benefit from all of the assets that a community has? And that includes a very expanded definition of equity and inclusivity, because it's rural and urban, it's older and younger, it's taking into account the demographic, the geographic, and the economic diversity that exists. That zip code where you're born or that zip code where you live should not make a difference in the opportunities that you have. And yet we know that it does make a difference. Next slide, please. And that's why we have, as a university, have to look at that community development, recognizing that we have many shared goals. We live, work, play, worship, and learn. And we know that we want to do it in facilities and with activities that allow us to participate fully. That when we think about place, we think about the transformational utilization of place. That what happens inside of a place is as important as where that place is sited. And there are many standard definitions of what makes a complete community, but one has to ask, how is that inclusive? How do universities fit within a complete community? Next slide, please. Well, one of the ways that we fit within a community is that we have the capacity to engage in strategic placemaking, which is quite impactful. And that's a word that I've chosen specifically because very often when we think about traditional placemaking, it's long-term planned, and it takes a very long time for that economic development initiative to come to fruition. But impactful strategic placemaking moves the needle. It has that tipping point. And it really focuses on what a university is. In a university, it's multiple roles. It's an anchor. It's an employer. It's a consumer of goods and services. It's a producer of talent, innovation, commercial ventures. It's a connector of assets and resources. It's an economic engine that helps ensure that a community is a quality community, a complete community, a livable community, and ultimately it's a connected community within its local area, within its region, and globally. Talent pipeline delivery is critical for national economic growth. It's critical for global competitiveness. And the number one product of a university from the workforce development context is delivering that talent pipeline and ensuring that students, current and future students, and returning students have an opportunity to be connected to what they see within their community and to the opportunities that exist outside of their community. Next slide, please. And that's important because when we think about building blocks for education, most of us approach education from a place of safety net security. Stability, reliability, accessibility, affordability, connectivity are all terms that we use to describe our lived experience. We assume that if we get an education, we will acquire work experience, and that will generate income that will help us create wealth, and that wealth will give us options that give us a future into which we can participate in all aspects of civic life. But that's not the reality for everyone. Next slide, please. For some, those words of stability, reliability, accessibility, affordability, connectivity are not what describe their lived daily experience. In fact, getting to the safety net is their first goal. And they need household support, and that's every member in the household, not the one person or two-parent household or any other description of household. It's every single individual in the household. And work is any work, any paid work, because you're cobbling together sources of income from the gig economy, from the side hustles, and from every other source in between. And having that income allows for aspirations, but it doesn't allow for options. Education, training, and career are sometimes outside of the reach, and they are something that is not an option for everyone. As we think about university and what it means to be a place in an institution within a community, we recognize that our role is about integrating and ensuring that everyone within our walls are actually not confined to the walls, that this is an open space where anyone within the community can participate, and our students and our faculty can go out into that community so that we are changing this dynamic. If you could go back to the previous slide, to ensure that that student focus is in fact an attainable experience for everyone that we're able to touch, and that that zip code, regardless of where the university is located, reaches every zip code of every student that we are able to touch. Dr. Blasey will discuss how the Illinois Innovation Network continues to impact communities to leverage that social equity and to build our workforce pipeline. Dr. Blasey.
Thank you, Jeanette. As Melissa said during the introductions, my name is Jerry Blasey. I'm the Vice President at Northern Illinois University, and I have the privilege to be the first IIN Chair, Council Chair, and I'll just take this opportunity to briefly describe the Council, one of our major activities, in fact, which really addresses the equity issues that Jeanette just outlined. And then I will speak a bit about the prospects for the future of the IIN. So just a bit of about IIN governance. The IIN Council is an advisory body that reports to the Office of the Vice President of Economic Development and Innovation, and that would be Jay, Dr. Walsh, who spoke at the start of this webinar. Each IIN hub has one representative. So just pause for a minute to think what that means. Every state university has a member of a council that reports to a University of Illinois system office. And this is extraordinary in itself, the level of cooperation between the institutions to try to promote the state's welfare and the state's economic well-being. So the council is well developed. As you heard Kyle or Dr. Harf say earlier, we now have an executive committee and 5 established working committees, and they're all quite busy meeting very frequently and trying to advance the program of the IIN. In a sentence, I would say the focus of the council is on the development and promotion of statewide initiatives. Next slide, please. The IIN Executive Committee itself is geographically and demographically diverse. In addition to me as chair at Northern Illinois University, the vice chair is Leslie Rountree at Chicago State. The secretary is Denise Cobb at SIU. The at-large member is Chris Merritt at Western Illinois University. So geographic diversity just in the executive committee, and 2 members from the U of I system, Dr. Walsh and Dr. Harf. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd take a bit of time to talk about one of our major initiatives. It's a statewide initiative on inclusive broadband infrastructure. So just as a bit of context, Connect Illinois, which is a component of the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, was launched by Governor Pritzker in 2019 to expand broadband access across the state. And they have 4 major goals: drive collaboration, align local and regional efforts, promote immediate technology expansion in the communities, and integrate across several programs that assist with broadband equity. So the IIN is deeply engaged in a grant program, which is called the Broadband Regional Engagement for Adoption and Digital Equity, or the Broadband Ready Grant Program. And the goal of that is to identify inequities in digital access and develop solutions. Turns out there's a grant for each of the 10 DCEO regions. IIN is well represented in each of the regions, so we thought we would be a natural partner for them. Project timeline for these grants are spring, summer of this year and fall of winter of this year and next year. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick graphic to show what's expected of these broadband ready grants. First of all, each region should have a current conditions summary that covers access, adoption, and utilization of broadband. Each region should have an indicator dashboard, which adds affordability to that. And then each region should come up with a digital divide elimination plan to connect communities, scale best practices, and also contribute to the regional progress towards statewide recovery from the pandemic. So this is a great example of our commitment to equity through the form of digital equity and inclusion. Next slide, please. So how does IIN work on these broadband ready grants? Well, it is coordinated by the UI system IIN office. We will have 2 phases. We will have the initial cohort studies followed by annual updates. And the goals that we're taking as the IIN are to balance the shorter term broadband expansion with longer term expansion, to focus on the digital inequities and opportunities, and leverage the infrastructure investment to drive economic prosperity. So this project speaks to our equity drives. It speaks to our commitment to economic prosperity across the entire region. So the middle, the image in the middle shows the 10 regions for the Office of Economic Opportunity. And 4 of our hubs are now involved in these studies. More will come on later with the second cohort. Northern Illinois in the Northern State Line region, University of Illinois in the East Central region, Eastern Illinois in the Southeast region, and in the Southern region, SIU. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in the last slide, we not only want to contribute to equity, but also the economy. And I thought it would be a good time in this presentation to show you what the predicted IIN economic impact as determined by a study by the Boston Consulting Group in December of 2019. And I'll just speak to the cumulative impact, and that's that text in blue. Over the next 10 years, the IIN will create 48,000 new economy jobs, an additional 27,000 jobs to support the new economy jobs, and it will create jobs for 23,000 individuals from underrepresented backgrounds and generate a total economic activity of $19 billion, something like $5 billion every year. So it's quite an impact, and it's such a large impact because it's spread across the state and it reaches all geographic and demographic entities or groups. Next slide, please. So as for the future of the Illinois Innovation Network, I would just like to say the IIN is well positioned to lead and support grand challenges. We're focusing on sustainability through the Illinois seed funding. And I want to stress with the Illinois seed funding grants, it requires that multiple hubs work on these research grants, which actually has shown the depth and breadth of our faculty expertise and our research expertise across the state. Many of the proposals wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration from different individuals with different expertise at different universities. We're focusing on the grand challenge of equity through the Illinois Broadband Ready grant program. And we're also focusing on workforce development. I don't really have time to go into that, but I will say that this is a major committee focus. We're looking at post-pandemic and remote education, apprenticeships, community college collaboration, workforce development with community organizations. We're really taking a broad view of workforce development. The IIN is also well positioned to align with local and regional industry and philanthropic sustainability and innovation priorities. It's well positioned to integrate with the state agencies. We work with the IBHE, the DCEO, Health and Human Services, and other state agencies and priorities as needed. And we're also well positioned to maximize the ability of Illinois to quickly and equitably implement national capital project and program priorities. And what we really are focusing on right now are the regional innovation hubs that are under consideration in several of the bills that are now being debated in Congress. Next slide, please. So we'll just leave you with this image before we go into Q&A. This truly is a remarkable and unique statewide network. The IIN, this kind of looks like an equation to me. The IIN is really much more than just the individual parts. We have incredible representation across the state in terms of demographics and geography, and are really working together to move the state forward in a number of ways. And as Kyle said earlier, in the package, there are slides on each one of these hubs, so you can get some information on what they're up to and what they're focusing on. And with that, I believe we're done, and I'll hand it back over to Melissa.
Excellent. Thanks to our speakers for that great overview. It looks like we have about 20 or so minutes remaining, so we'll now move into a question and answer portion. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for our panelists, please just go ahead and submit those through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. I do have a couple of initial questions to get us started though. The first one is a pretty basic question. how can our federal, state, and local elected officials, which are represented in our audience today, get involved with IIN? What are some of the ways that they can support IIN's efforts? And I think this is probably a question for all of our panelists, whoever wants to go ahead and jump in first.
Sure, I'd be happy to get things started, but there are a number of ways to include our public partners. As we had talked a couple different occasions throughout the presentation, we've set up working committees to accomplish many of the activities of the Illinois Innovation Network. And within those working committees on basic topical areas, we populated them with folks from throughout the state, both private sector folks, folks from the university, as well as we do have state and federal agency representations on a number of the committees. But then as the individual capital projects are being stood up, so to speak, so as construction takes place to help support the different hubs in the network, we're also looking at creating individual advisory bodies at each hub. And so certainly participation in that respect, could take place. And then also being a participant or partner, if you will, whether it's operational funding or supplemental capital funding for their individual projects.
I guess I would just like to add that our elected officials should consider the IIN a resource when there are issues that need elucidation or you need some expertise to help resolve them. You will find it somewhere at one of the universities in the IIN. You should just reach out to your local hub and start that conversation.
Great, thank you. For our next question, out of DC, we've seen several proposals, including the Endless Frontier Act and the American Jobs Plan, which actually the first one has now since changed names as of this week. But they call for creating regional hubs to support regional economic development activities. Although legislation is still evolving and it's unclear exactly what these hubs are going to look like, Jay and Jerry, can you talk a little bit about some of the ways in which IIN's work might be able to fit into the future opportunities that are on the horizon?
Jerry, you want to start?
Go ahead, Jay.
So first, a couple things. And this is bringing coals to Newcastle. The folks certainly on the federal side know that these bills are going through quite a bit of conversations right now, and it's kind of a fluid environment at the moment. Certainly what I see is the opportunity here at the federal level to support networks of innovation, hubs of innovation, certainly, that are in less traditional places. That's been the national conversation, is that a lot of innovation has occurred in a couple places across the country. Certainly it's been concentrated in those places. I would say there's innovation in a variety of other places. Chicago and the state of Illinois has played a significant role in innovation, but there is huge opportunity across the states that the IIN is stood up to leverage the opportunities and to help each of the different hubs look at each other, understand what the strengths are that the other hub has to offer to any particular hub, and be able to better catalyze the activity within each of these hubs. I would see federal and even state funds being used. Certainly, state funds are already being used to drive forward these innovation hubs and to move a number of initiatives forward. That's at a very high level. We can get into some of the details, and and as Kyle mentioned, we have a number of slides at the end of the slide deck that goes into the details of what each of the hubs is doing. And, we could talk about the details of those, if that seems appropriate. Jerry, what would you like to add here?
Just a couple things. These regional hubs, as I understand it, part of the rationale is to bring the innovation ecosystems to areas that haven't enjoyed them in the past. And that's by and large rural areas or peri-urban areas. And although Illinois is kind of characterized by Chicago, it's primarily a rural state. I live 40 miles outside of Chicago, and I can tell you it's very rural out here. And the IIN is already set up to help. Its goal is to bring innovation and economic development across the state. So it's already set up and can be an integral component of any regional innovation system. And the second comment I'll make is that I don't think it's going to be enough to have a new regional innovation hub in one spot in one region. It's got to have some way to reach out and share that innovation and promote innovation across the region it's cited in, and the IIN is also doing that. So I actually think the IIN is well positioned to be a lead or an important partner in a regional innovation hub.
Yeah, I would add one more thing to that. And Jerry, you brought up the rural component and reminded me of this. If you look at the innovation hubs that are dominating the United States at this point, they are not terribly inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal here actually is to be intentional about being inclusive in the activity that we're doing. There is certainly an urban component to that. There is a peri-urban component, and there is absolutely a rural component to that. And we are absolutely being intentional about all of those aspects as we move this forward, as we conceive of how this network can have impact. And Jeanette, I see you came off mute, and I'm just looking and thinking maybe you want to add something, or Jerry, you might want to add something too.
No, I'm glad I thank you for pointing that out. We not only do we have geographic reach, we have tremendous demographic reach.
And what I was going to add is that if you look at where successful state and federal investments have been, it's been in networks, in the ability to link communities to each other and outside of each other. And that, I think, is an absolutely critical piece for the Illinois Innovation Network, which has that capacity to do that. A single investment in a community does not reach the tipping point, but multiple investments in multiple communities at that same point in time has the opportunity to leverage a broader region. And traditionally, one of our competitors, China, for example, really does not care which city is in the United States. They focus on certain ones. The rest is just considered part of the United States. We have the ability to link and leverage the regions to be competitors that tie into what's happening in Chicago and in Boston and the Research Triangle out in the East and West Coast. And that, I think, is extraordinarily innovative to what other states are able to do.
Thank you. That's really helpful. More to come on that then. Certainly very exciting, and it's something that we'll be keeping our eye on. For my next question, last fall, Governor Pritzker released more than $142 million in capital funding that was approved by the General Assembly to support the construction of DPI's permanent headquarters in downtown Chicago, as well as IIN facilities and other projects on 5 public university campuses. Altogether, 6 of the 15 IIN hubs received funding in this first round. Can you share just a quick update on how these funds are being used and when you might expect to receive the funding for the remainder hubs? And Kyle, can I turn that one over to you?
Sure. Actually, it's about 45 million that have been dedicated to the IIN hubs. That was a part of a larger capital, I think, in investment within the state. So there are 7 hubs who've received some initial funding thus far. And just very briefly, Chicago State University, they're going to establish the Center for Solutions of Urban Populations. The focus for this particular hub will be addressing the health, social, economic, environmental issues confronting Chicago's South Side, including violence reduction, urban food disparities, and economic development. Melissa, you mentioned Discovery Partners Institute, or DPI for short. They're focused on 3 areas: workforce and education solutions for new economy talent, expanding the diversity of the new economic development, or economic talent pipeline, and then transforming the state's economy through research and innovation activities. The third hub to receive funding thus far is Eastern Illinois University. They're setting up what's called the East Central Illinois Hub as a partnership with the local community college, Lakeland College. And their hub will address issues of the environment, economic development, entrepreneurship, community-based assets, rural social systems, and community sustainability. The fourth hub to receive funding thus far would be Governor State University. They're setting up a supply chain innovation center and business incubator, providing faculty consulting to businesses and startups in Chicago's Southland region, and deliver employee training and management programs. So logistics is a large part of their area. The next hub to receive funding is the Peoria Innovation Lab, which is fondly known as Distillery Labs. Nothing to do with distilled spirits, but they're using the heritage of distilleries at the turn of century 100 years ago, or over 100 years ago, to embrace this innovation and entrepreneurship in the Peoria area. Their hub is dedicated to improve the wellness of underserved populations and advancing systems related to food, farming, and transportation, specifically looking around autonomous mobility. And then the next hub to receive funding thus far is at the University of Illinois Chicago location. And that's basically to expand the Innovation Center while increasing the school's capacity for partnerships and entrepreneurship programs. Finally, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is undergoing a renovation of one of the buildings. It's a blended project, if you will, with other investments. This will actually create a major research and education center for big data science while connecting the campus's data scientists with business, industry, and the community. And ultimately will be providing meaningful exposure to students around data sciences.
Thanks for that update. And I see we also pasted into the chat a link to the announcements about the releases of funding. I think one more is to come about Peoria. So you can check those out for some additional information. As we've said, we'll be sharing slides following this event with the whole group. Going back to the federal side of things, another one for you, I think, Kyle. Have any of the IIN hubs thus far been able to secure federal funding to advance their efforts? What
Yes.
does that look like?
Yeah, a couple of examples that come to mind. Governor State, which I mentioned, is emphasizing logistics and distribution activities. They've received some programmatic funding. And again, I'd like to point out that the state's investment with the different hubs in the network, that's capital funding or infrastructure funding, not operational funding. And so when working with our hubs, we're looking at helping to leverage operational activities as well as the capital investment. So U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration has partnered with Governor State to provide operational or programmatic support for their hub. And I do recall that Carbondale's hub, which is IFERM, Fermentation Science Institute, as well as the School of Medicine and the College of Agricultural Sciences are all partners with that individual hub. They've received some funding, some initial funding from the United States Department of Agriculture, and they've been a strong partner. USDA has been a strong partner for that particular hub. But a lot of this, again, partial funding has been received, and as we're working with the hubs to try to find additional partnerships, at the federal basis, this is somewhat of a fluid process where there are some I guess, negotiations or activities taking place right now, but really cannot discuss any others that have because they have not been announced yet.
Sure, of course. Jerry, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, not so much secured funding, but discussions about partnerships with the federal government. At NIU, one of the emphases of our hub is water resources, and we're in ongoing and pretty detailed discussions with the USGS about collaborating with them on site at NIU and in our hub. So I wouldn't say it's actual funding, but it's really a partnership that will involve co-funding of research projects.
Great. And Jerry, you had a few slides during the presentation that talked about the broadband planning work that you're doing with the state of Illinois. And it really does seem like a good foundational piece to establish baselines and standards. Have you thought of any ways that it could connect to federal broadband priorities or opportunities? And this is yet another question in which things are still very much evolving on the federal landscape as Congress is.
Yeah, I think your question sort of answers itself, Melissa. All the work we're doing will be very informative for broadband expansion in our region. And I think it will fit very well, be very informative for the infrastructure packages that are being considered going forward. But beyond that, it's a little bit early to answer that question until we know more about those programs.
Understandable. And just another call for questions as we're now about 5 minutes to the end of the hour. I do have one more that relates to just additional comments. We've heard a bunch already thus far, but as far as how the hubs interact with one another and how they really are this network. I think maybe a key example is the seed grants, because they do require, right, two hubs, at least two hubs to be working together. But Kyle, I throw this out to everyone. Is there more on that as far as like maybe some ways the topical areas overlap occasionally? Researchers, access to that.
Right. One of the things that has been valuable with Sustaining Illinois, it's forced researchers, whether they're at NIU, SIU, Western, Eastern, wherever, to communicate with one another. And so that's been a process of getting like scientists to know one another. And one of the things we accomplished last summer was with Argonne, as well as Fermi, both of them are research labs, federal research labs in the Chicagoland area, is held a lunch and learn webinar to introduce them to university scientists within the publics. And so we've started doing that. But then also with the Sustaining Illinois seed grants, specifically what you had talked about, in setting up this program, as I mentioned, it required the participation. Well, not everybody is going to get funded. And so one of the things, we've had 2 different rounds, we're evaluating the 3rd round thus far, is some of the interaction is actually as valuable, if not more valuable, for those entities who did not receive funding, from this. We'll go back and help them evaluate their grants. And on a couple of occasions, we pointed them to other university folks who they were not aware of. And so we brought those introductions as well. So it's been a very good distributed process.
So Michelle, another great example is we put on a workshop, a yearly workshop on sustainability, one of those grand challenges, that 2 or 3 day workshop, all the universities participate. And I think it's really helping us focus on those issues the state needs to deal with, and also pull together the researchers that can address with us. That's actually, and I think that was sponsored in part by the central office. And I think that's actually well received, and people look forward to that workshop every year.
Great, thank you both. Final question that came through: what are specific ways that the hubs will promote equity and expanded opportunity for communities across Illinois? And Jeanette, I feel like that's right in your wheelhouse.
Certainly. So one of the first ways is recognizing that we have work to do, first and foremost. Second, reaching out to communities and rethinking our hubs as a physical building or as an educational institution, to really recognizing where they are sited in terms of community and respecting that history and what that community seeks and wants. So it's very inclusive. The other part of it is recognizing that we have to review all of our policies, our programs, and our practices, and from the beginning, build in diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. It's not enough to have built it and at the end say, okay, here's how we're going to use it. We need to ensure that we are in the design incorporating that equity. And I would also add that when we think about what we're doing, it's a presentation like today, reaching out to everyone and saying, this is how we're approaching it. We want to hear back from you. What resonates with you? What doesn't resonate with you? What is it that we're missing? How can we improve this so that it's a conversation with everyone who's affected? And certainly our legislative and our congressional representatives are affected. Their community is affected. So is our entire state. And it's broadening that definition to be as inclusive as we can possibly be.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap up our program for today. If you're interested in staying connected with IIN and receiving regular updates, please just reach out to our government relations team or to any of our speakers. I also want to note that we're planning to have another altogether extraordinary webinar in early July after the holidays, so you can expect to see an invite for that in the coming weeks. Again, thank you to all the listeners for spending your Friday morning with us. And thank you, Jay, Kyle, Jeanette, and Jerry for providing this briefing. Thanks so much, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a good weekend.
Bye.
Everyone.
Take care.